Hi, my name is Mark Collins. I'm the National Director for the Church of the Nazarene, Canada. I've been reading this book by Timothy Gaines called Christian Ethics, and when I first picked it up, it's a very easy reading book, but it caused a stir in my mind of some of the situations that we face here in Canada, especially in terms of MAiD. I believe MAiD began its journey in Canada about 2016 and up to 2024. 60,000 people have taken advantage of that to end their lives in some way, shape, or form through the medical assistance in dying as sponsored by the Canadian government. It has brought up a conversation within the church that's quite concerning, and the questions that are being asked are, what is our theological stance on this in Canada? What does that mean? How can I make these decisions? And as individuals, what do we do about this? And so I had an opportunity to sit down with two highly intelligent doctors, Dr. Rob Snow and Dr. Dave Rainey. And we had a hash-out session of what this could mean, might mean, and would mean for individuals. I'm inviting you to be a part of this. We're going to spread these out over 3 sessions, and if you'd like to be a part, join us as they come up. You'll find it interesting and stimulating, I believe, but when it's all said and done, we hope that you'll find the answers that you need for such a time as this. So Dave, I'm going to introduce you first. Dave Rainey, and you correct me if I got your name wrong because my head goes blank sometimes. Dave Rainey is a Wesleyan holiness authority, trained in England. And what university do you go to there?
University of London.
The University of London. Okay, all right. And Rob Snow. Rob, you're the Dean of Theology at Ambrose University, and both highly educated doctors and specialists in their field.
Yeah. Rob was also English trained. His PhD is England.
Yeah.
Too.
Oh,
both of us are trained.
Where? Which
Manchester.
one? Manchester.
University of Manchester.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And in fact, David was in my PhD Viva, which was a horrifying experience, but we'll save that for another day.
Yeah, I remember that now, yeah. How this all came about was I was promoting this for the publishing house, the Foundry, and I inadvertently, in one of the things, I think it was Canada West District, I showed the book and it talked about what it was about. And all of a sudden there was a run on the table and we sold every one of them. And then we had to order more,
right.
even, you remember that?
Yeah,
we had to order more.
Probably
and
district
then,
assembly.
Right, then the general superintendent actually brought them up and distributed them to the people who, and other people bought this thing online. So as I was reading through it, before I had recommended it, one of the things that stood out in there was the conversation on MAiD. And MAiD is a really difficult issue in Canada right now, as you know. Canada leads the country. The statistics are, I just checked again, from the 2024 statistics, that the statistics are 60,301 people have taken part in MAiD that are recorded. I have had a number of pastors call and a number of lay people ask me this same question. What do we do about MAiD as a people who see life and our Christianity through the lens of Wesleyan holiness theology, right? So that's a distinctive place that we're coming from.
Yep.
And so if we could talk about that, I want to give you a scenario that happened recently. A pastor called, and he was very troubled. He said, I didn't know what to do because I was called to a home for a pastoral call. They didn't tell me what it was about. They just said, could you please come see our father and you know, just have a pastoral visit with him. And so the pastor did. He got there, and while he was at the door, this was the interesting thing. While he was at the door, the eldest child said to him, they said, you know why you're here, right? And he said, no, it's just a pastoral call. It's kind of why I was here. I don't know what the problem is. And the oldest child said, well, our parent is going through MAiD. They've requested MAiD. They've gone through all the process, and this is the day, and we need someone here to be with them, and you're it.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't know what to do, right? So the pastor, he said, well, I didn't know what to do, and everything flashed through my mind. I thought about what would Jesus do? Where am I at? What does this mean for the manual and our statement on euthanasia? and we have a strong statement against euthanasia. Is this euthanasia, and all of that. He said, so what I did was I went in and I just sat with them. I prayed over them, while all of this was happening. He said, but I feel terrible about it. I don't know if I did right.
Right.
I want us to talk about this. All right. So MAiD, let's define this. It's medical assistance in dying, right? Those three things. Sponsored by the government. For people who, it began first for people who were terminally ill, facing really difficult illnesses to kind of speed them through that and save them all of the suffering. It's moved from that to people who perhaps are having mental illness. It moved from that and there's some other things that are on the horizon. We won't talk about that until they become reality, if they do. But we want to talk about what should the Christian's response be in the context of a Wesleyan holiness view. Rob, you want to start, and then we'll ask Dave. Where are you at with this?
I think the thing to realize fundamentally first, as we think about these various topics in Christian ethics and facing the church today, is to think about what is ethics and how do we do ethics. And of course, folks in the secular world, there's whole philosophical schools and history built around from Socrates onward about how to live well and live the good life. So this isn't a new conversation by any means, but I think for us, we want to talk about what is ethics, what does it mean to be a Wesleyan who's, understands our theology well of heart holiness and purity, and how does that relate to how we make decisions and how does that influence our behaviors. And I would kind of like to bring the conversation to that kind of fundamental level first, just so that we know that we're on the same page, especially as it relates to some of the fundamental stuff that Tim Gaines raises in his book too, around the background of Christian ethics. And to start that off, I would say one thing that I found helpful when he began the book is that we're always doing ethics. We're engaged in ethical behavior whether we know it or not. And so that's an important thing for folks to realize, that we all have an ethical outlook, a viewpoint that's informed by a set of principles and values. And I think where our tradition can speak into that is, what are those principles and values that drive and define our ethical behavior? So, David, what do you think in terms of, a Wesleyan view on ethics? What's of primary significance when we think about the things that should shape our behavior?
And before you do that, but give us an example first and then describe it for us, would you? What's an example?
Of a Wesleyan ethical...
Yeah, Wesleyan ethical question.
Okay, the example is MAiD.
Okay. Well, okay, other than MAiD, what would be one?
Oh, dear. It's hard to say, because these are questions every church, regardless of denomination, is facing.
Right.
A Wesleyan idea is you try to construct purity of heart and this entire devotion to God. That's our basic agenda. So then it is, how does God perceive what we're discussing?
Okay.
And I'll use one example. Wesley wrote a response to slavery, thoughts on slavery.
Okay.
He never quoted the Bible once.
Oh.
Because slave owners quoted the Bible.
George
Whitefield, his colleague, was a slave owner in America.
Oh.
Said, it's cheaper, I can run orphanages with slave labor, doesn't cost me anything.
Okay.
Wesley knows that. So the Wesleyan response was, humanity isn't made for slavery.
Okay.
And he wrote the essay. He called it Natural Law. God's creation.
Okay.
Is
okay.
Against.
So buying T-shirts made by slavery or slave labor. That's an ethical question that everybody faces every day. Where do I do my shopping?
Exactly.
Buying food is an ethical question. Where do I buy my food? Okay. So those are some of the very simple to your point, Rob, that ethics, we do it all the time without even realizing it.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and you said, Dave, that, define that again about the Wesleyan component of it.
Well, Wesley is, a determined purity of heart. He wants to see Christians with a purity of heart making ethical decisions. That's a huge challenge. That's a massive challenge to say that. But then it's, what do you think God says to humanity about this issue? It's in one sense unresolvable. Ethical problems are somewhat unresolvable. If I defined it in terms of purity of heart and entire devotion to God, my colleague disagrees with me still.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet we're not saying we don't have purity of heart or entire devotion to God. Biblically, I could say in the Old Testament there is a defense of slavery. He even gives laws on that one. But I think the New Testament is moving us out of that world.
Totally.
And,
Right.
and it's, eventually the church moves out of that slavery world.
Right, right.
So ethics is this moving target constantly.
Right. So what I hear you say, and one of the things that are standing out here, what I hear you saying is there's no hard and fast rule for ethics, because if you with a pure heart, and everybody's at a different stage of development in their walk with the Lord, and especially in the walk of holiness, that some who hear it very clearly can respond to what you're saying. Others are looking for, I want a yes or a no.
Right, and I would say from a theological perspective, theology isn't theology unless it's operating in a context. It needs a place to live and operate. How am I relating to God? How does God relate to me in this cultural moment in this particular issue? And so that's the thing. To Dave's point, it becomes hard to define in some cases what does purity look like. If George Whitefield had a slave, obviously he felt purity didn't touch that or relate to it,
That's
versus
right.
Wesley said, oh, it most certainly does.
Yeah.
Okay.
But George Whitefield and John Wesley still maintained their friendship.
Oh, interesting.
They had difficult years over, of all things, predestination.
Oh, really?
But
not slavery.
But not slavery. They just disagreed on this. And slavery was an active part of the British Empire as well as the American Empire.
Oh.
So Wesley's, actually in his essay, he says politicians don't care about the slavery issue. So I can't write to them. They're not even going to care about what I'm arguing for. So he went to the economy of slavery and said it won't hurt the British economy if we drop it. So he went to the slave owners and said, your ethics is called into question. So,
Interesting.
so you realize Rob is right. Context is a major component
Right.
of how we engage in these kinds of questions. So the Canadian view right now is it's legal. Medically assisted is now illegal, but you can go to other countries where it's murder. They'll convict you for it.
Right.
So you then realize countries have different laws.
Right. So in our context is where we're gonna go, but it's important to note, and you both have talked into this, that ethics, we make ethical decisions constantly, right? We don't realize it, but we make them constantly. And Dave, to your point, somewhere and in our theology and in our walk with God, and as we struggle towards purity of heart, and everybody's on a different view, on a different place on the path into that and through that all plays a part of our context. So our context is not just Canada, it's who we are in that context as well.
You see, even my grandson makes ethical decisions.
Right.
Children make ethical decisions.
Yeah.
That's just part of what it is to be human.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on. Let's take this one. And Rob, you start with the answer to this, being the Bible scholar of the Gospel of Mark. What did Jesus say about ethical questions?
I mean, a lot of his the challenges that he got on ethical sorts of things were from the religious leaders.
Yep.
About, for instance, working on Sabbath. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? And I think in some ways, for Jesus, he does engage the religious leaders, but it's very limited. But I think the thing that captures the whole thing in terms of the ethics of Jesus is when the lawyer comes up to him and asks, which is the greatest commandment? Mm-hmm. And Jesus responds, in short, love God and love neighbor, quoting from two different parts of the Old Testament. And and to build on that, Jesus says, and on these two commands hang all the law and the prophets. Mm-hmm. So for him, and this is where our Wesleyan theology is rooted on this foundation, that rightly relating ourselves to God in devotion and worship and serving and loving neighbor is the ethical moral value that drives everything that we do. And so for Jesus, it's summed up in that. Now, we still have the working out of what does loving my neighbor look like in this particular situation.
Right.
So in the case of MAiD, so if you're the pastor coming alongside somebody who has chosen this, maybe in the congregation or a relative of the congregation, what does loving that individual in that moment mean, even though you may disagree with something they're about to engage in? And the challenge for us as holiness people, we have, at least in the Nazarene tradition coming out of the American holiness movement, it's all about separation from the world and a purity that's defined by what we are not. And I think for sometimes for Nazarenes, we have trouble sitting and being with people who we may perceive to be engaging in some impure activity or something that's not godly in the case of medical assisted dying, and we needlessly create a barrier in ministering to people that we may disagree with. And I think that's the challenge for us, is how are we sitting with people who we would disagree with something that they're engaging in. And I think Jesus in the Gospel of Luke captures or rather demonstrates a holiness that is the barrier. It isn't defined by separation and division. It's defined by drawing others into the space of Jesus, and he goes into their spaces and sits with them in the hope of redeeming them and seeing them find God. And I think whatever we decide about our ethical behavior, it needs to be modeled on Jesus, who is with other people even at his own personal expense in the eyes of the religious.
Right. Good point. So what I hear you saying is that in the old days, and I remember growing up, in the church, and I think we all have the same experience, that we really were defined by what we didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
And we weren't defined by what we did. And I remember asking that question to pastors and to leaders in the church. I know what not to do, but I don't know what to do. Yeah. There's a difference there. So I think we're moving into some good space. Dave, would you answer the question about John Wesley's view on defining, from a Wesleyan holiness perspective, to do or not to, negative or positive? What did he say about that kind of stuff?
He majored on the positive.
Example.
It was brother. Love of neighbor.
Okay.
He would, in the worst of weather, be out on the streets of London raising money for the poor. Mm-hmm. And in his old age, he'd be doing this. Mm-hmm. He could never stop doing good for people. The Church of England in his day didn't have a list of things not to do. There were no
No?
No negatives.
That was a Nazarene thing?
No, it was a Church of England.
No, I know,
No,
but it's a Nazarene thing?
But the
that they-
Nazarenes then
Okay, we'll cut
took
this part
that,
out.
did it differently because the era that the Church of the Nazarene was starting in the beginning of the 20th century, they saw the inroads of the worldly culture.
Right,
And so they told us what not to do,
right.
to align ourselves with that worldly culture. It was a major, major issue for their beginnings.
Right.
And they agreed to join together, not on the positives, but we all agree on these negatives.
Right, right.
And so
But wasn't that part of the Prohibition movement?
it was an aspect of Prohibition.
I mean, the very term Prohibition, right?
Yeah, it was that, but in those days, Prohibition looked pretty positive because
Right.
women took the lead in the Prohibition because their
Right.
husbands were coming home drunk and no money for food,
Right.
groceries.
Yeah.
So they took the
Destroying
lead to
society.
say, and huge swathes of people supported that movement.
Sure, yeah.
It wasn't
Government.
as controversial as sometimes it's created
Right.
to have the Prohibition movement.
Yeah.
It was family oriented.
So there's a good example of a contextualized
That-
theology.
that's right.
Right,
Yeah.
Where you've
right.
got an issue, an ethical issue. It's definitely causing a problem. This isn't leading to the good life as in a kind of a secular philosophical sense, and is certainly not leading to a holy life
Right.
either. And
Yeah.
so you see
So-
people engage in that.
Yeah,
Right,
so let
right.
me explain it this way. Alcohol was a major issue in Wesley's day, but he wasn't alcohol free
Okay.
because the streets were running with filth and sewage.
Right.
Try and find clean water
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Wesley's day.
Yeah, I'd heard that. Yeah.
A glass of wine was healthier
Right, than the water.
than the
Yeah.
water.
Yeah.
And so Wesley hung out in pubs.
So at the early days of the church, you remember there was Pilot Point, Texas, and the house for unwed mothers, right? Now that in my mind that's something we do. That's not something we don't do. Alcohol was something that everybody signed up and said, okay, we're going to make a list of what we don't do.
Yes.
And I think that kind of put us on a trajectory as a denomination to define ourselves in the negative, not in the positive. You know, but then,
Well,
I say that because there's more people who would know we don't drink alcohol than, well, why didn't we make more house for unwed mothers, more homes, you know, for kids that would be aborted if
Yeah.
they didn't have a place.
Yeah,
you know?
so let me, this is true, I think, of all systems. The Prohibition had a point to it. Christians supported it. There was a
Right,
point
right.
to that. A lot of Christians. But then we turned it into a sort of a law that never changes.
Right,
Right.
right,
Yeah.
right,
And that's when things become negative.
right, right.
No
Rental.
longer was a positive.
Right,
It became a negative, but we still maintained the rigid law.
right, right,
And I can find that in the Old Testament. That's what Jesus, I think, and Paul are against.
Right.
Turning the Old Testament law into a rigid system
right,
that ruins your life.
right.
Yeah. And I think the New Testament bears that out. So
Yep.
in early Christianity, in Acts
Yep.
2, everyone has all things in common.
Right.
But Paul would have known about that. He makes a collection for the poor and so forth. But he doesn't mandate in the churches he establishes to be in a communal sense of sharing everything. People keep their own resources because in the Greco-Roman context outside of Jerusalem, it wouldn't make sense. There was no need for it versus the social dynamics are different in Jerusalem where they put all things together. And that's a perfect example of where, the church, guided by the Spirit, Paul guided by the Spirit, is looking at the context to see what is the best way to do X, Y, or Z. In this case, manage economics.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so what I hear you say then, just to kind of summarize this, what I hear you say then, the ethics, Christian ethics, we do every day. And in Christian ethics, what we're looking for is a pathway for believers, especially of the Wesleyan holiness tradition, to find a way in their context, in their time, in that moment,
Yeah.
to deal with situations like MAiD, and that's the one we're going to talk about.